Well, hello, my friend. Welcome back to another episode of the Chaos to Peace podcast, where I talk about how clutter is so much more than you think. Thank you so much for allowing me back into your ears. Well, hello, my friend. I'm Conny Graf, your host. Welcome to the podcast. Today's guest is Pamela Wagner. Pam is an adventurer turned entrepreneur that says, there's little that I haven't done yet at the age of 32. Just to mention a few accomplishments, I've been to 100 countries, bootstrapped and built a six-figure agency with no entrepreneurial background, worked at Google, been featured multiple times in Forbes, got a master's degree from Harvard Extension School, and climbed Kilimanjaro. There is way more to Pamela. If you're interested in more info, go check out her bio in the show notes. But one thing I want to mention here, even though Pamela grew up in Austria as a monolingual, she now speaks English, Spanish and Russian fluently, studied Mandarin in Austria and China, and dabbles in various other languages at her leisure. She considers herself a lifelong learner and has 3 university degrees. And while 75% of managers and business owners are burned out, she must have a secret because she isn't burned out despite all her achievements and all her businesses and endeavors that she is constantly doing. So in this episode, we talk about how she prioritizes and balances all this without getting stressed out. How her globetrotting experience shaped her life and the effects it has on her career and six-figure agency. She also shares daily science-backed hacks for a stress-free you and a life that truly feels good. So, without further ado, let's jump into this conversation. Welcome, Pamela. I'm very excited to have you on the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you, Connie. I'm doing great. It's very sunny and the blue sky, so cannot complain at all.
Yeah, it's sunny and blue sky here too. But so tell my audience where in the world you're located. And I know you're traveling a lot. So where are you located right now?
Right now, I'm in Palo Alto in California, pretty much right next to Stanford.
Oh, wow. Awesome. And tell us also something surprising or quirky about you that has nothing to do with what we're talking about afterwards.
So let me see. I actually just did a round the world trip this year. And that I did not plan it. I did not plan it all the way through. It literally just came to be after I booked the first one-way ticket. So it was very spontaneous. And during that trip, I ended up volunteering at a cat shelter that was called, and I hope I can say this on the podcast, it was called the Pussy Palace for Pensioners. And it was 250 just adorable cats in New Zealand living their best lives.
Oh, wow, that's awesome. But you are a little bit of a travel bug anyway, so I'm not that surprised that you end up on a round trip or on a trip around the world, right? So yeah, so now I want to test you because I found something funny on your website. So, how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 5?
I would say I'm a good 5.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I
awesome.
feel happy and content and yeah.
And stress-free, I assume.
Almost. You know what? I'm not gonna lie. I'm very much learning right now to deal with whatever comes up that I didn't expect to go my way and then not let that influence me too much. So it is a work in progress.
Yeah, but then in a way, that's what you're helping people with, right? Because one of the things that you told me is like calm and happy leadership and going from stress to success. So I think the only way how we can teach something is if we're actually learning it or doing it ourselves. So that's perfect. Well, I don't want to say it's perfect that you're a little bit in stress. That would be mean, but I mean, it's a perfect segue into our conversation, right? So that you're learning that. And I thought it was really funny that you have this little survey. How how happy are you on a scale of 1 to 5? What is the most common answer to that question? Do you know?
To be honest, I would have to check in with my team about that.
That's
I
okay.
don't know it by heart right now, but I can tell you one thing. So we do have a similar survey on for the ad agency that I've run as well. And there we ask people on a scale of 1 to David Ogilvy, how awesome are you? And
Mhm.
David Ogilvy used to be one of the old grandfathers of fathers of advertising, right? And so about like 50% don't have that much confidence to say that they're awesome. So they say something else. And then the remainders go somewhere like 100, David, or they just mention something else. So
Mhm.
it's always quite funny to see the responses of people because you get a little bit of an idea about their personality.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was really cute. And yeah, so with Algae, probably most people don't dare to say they're doing awesome, right? Because we're kind of trained to not brag about ourselves, and only certain people can do it. But you have all
Yeah.
kinds of reasons to brag about yourself, because when I read your bio, I can't even read it all out here. It's almost scary and very impressive. So how did that come about? Like, was little Pamela already very ambitious from the beginning? Is that how this all happened? And tell us a little bit. So, in what order did you achieve all this awesome stuff? I let you talk about it instead of me reading it all out.
Sure. So I grew up in a less than ideal circumstances. I mean, I had a home, I had a roof over my head, I had a beautiful home. I had a home with a garden. I had good access to schools, and I come from like a middle income family background. The thing was just that I grew up with a very dysfunctional relationship with my parents and witnessing that. And then in addition to that, I was bullied for like pretty much the whole time of my school years. And I went to school for 10 years. I had skipped 2 grades in school. So like, I loved school. I loved doing sports, and school was almost my safe space, but I didn't really have any friends. I didn't really learn how to forge social connections. The only social connections that I had was with like adults, and those I loved. Like, I loved interacting with them, and peer to peer conversations were boring to me. So socially, I grew up being quite different from others. And in hindsight, I've seen that because I was bullied and I did things differently from others, I quickly learned to go my own way. So no matter what other people said, I just went my own way. If everybody at the party said, "Hey, we're going to stay up at 5 a.m." and I felt like at 11 a.m. that I want to go back home, I just went back home. So that really helped me. And when I then started my own company, I wanted to do things differently. I didn't want to believe in a hustle heart story. I didn't want to believe that it takes 80 hours to start a company, that you just have to work hard, because you can see that there's so many people out there that make different amounts of money, that make different kinds of impacts, but we all have the same hours in the day. And so I developed this interest to understand what's really going on, because also these days we all have equal access to opportunities. We all have access to the internet. The same kind of knowledge is for free, available to all of us everywhere in the world. Internet access exists in almost everywhere in the world for very marginal amounts by now. So I just started having this interest. What do people really want in life? How do they achieve that? And why do we just sometimes choose to struggle for so much longer than we actually have to? Because a lot of people only end up changing stuff when there's tragedy, when there's a
Mhm.
health issue, when there's a relationship breakup. And it really doesn't have to go that far in order to make a change or to live a better life.
Yeah, I agree with you, but then often most people wait until it hurts so bad that, or they have no other choice, right? So what is your insight on that? Because like when we're looking, like you're talking also about how you can be in the business, or how you can be a leader without burning out. But a lot of people burn out because they're not willing to make a change until they're burned out, and literally, like, either their body says, "Look, that's it," or whatever happens, and they finally do make a change. So what do you think is it that we are kind of, are we wired to go that far, all the way to a burnout, or are we conditioned by society to do that? Or what is your theory on that?
So it's more like the nature of human beings is that our brain perceives change as dangerous.
Mm,
So that's the reason why Rada keeps us where we are, even though that's worse for us than making a change, because it thinks that, hey, whatever changes ahead, I don't know what's coming. And that's so scary. So I rather keep doing the things that hurt me, that hurt others, because at least that's something I know. And at
mm-hmm,
least that's something I can control. So a lot of times when we want to make change, people also deal with their, or get confronted with their control issues that they might not have even been aware of.
mm-hmm,
Because when we want to make a change, it means we have to let go of something. And it also means we might not always know what's going to come next, right? But the one thing I try to remind people of is that for your brain, imagination and reality is the same. Like there's been tons of like studies with brain scans that show whether you imagine or you experience something, almost the same amounts and the same types of areas in the brain light up. So you have an immense power with that when you want to change something, to actually help with your imagination, visualize what you want in order to get more of whatever outcome you want faster, and hopefully without getting to that breaking point.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So that's what I'm dealing with when I'm working with my clients. Any change is kind of scary, right? And the people don't want to do it. So they'd rather deal with the stress and the chaos than changing anything. So now you also traveled like crazy around the world, not just by accident this year, but just in general. I think you told me that you were in over 100 countries. Is there a difference between, like, let's say here, well, let's say North America or Europe and the rest of the world in this regard, like with the being scared of changes? Are there areas in the world or countries where you found that people are more open to change?
Honestly, it's the same pretty much everywhere.
Mm,
The one thing that just changes across the world a little bit is the influence of family. So in Europe, we do have a little bit of less influence of the family. We're a little bit more like free spirited, so to speak. If we look at like India or the Philippines, there's a lot more family expectations that are put on oneself.
mhm,
And then, of course, if you want to create change, and that just doesn't is different from what you experience, but also what your family experiences, then that's much harder to bring about,
mm,
right?
mhm. Yeah. I can imagine, because if your closest loved ones have these certain expectations on you and you're trying to go against it, that must be double, triple scary, compared to if you're more free, or if you have an environment that actually encourages you to explore your passions, or is there as a safe haven, let's say. And so I'm wondering, so I had a similar upbringing too. I was bullied a lot. Home wasn't necessarily, I don't want to say it wasn't safe. It was just, I didn't feel understood there either. I always felt like the stork brought me to the wrong house or something. That's how I felt. So I'm wondering sometimes, is it easy? So then is it easier for us that we had to fight as children already to get our own, or be our own person without relying on this? Is it easier then to go against that social norm? And also, to just travel and not be home in one place, because I did a little bit of something similar. So,
Yeah, so the one thing that helps a lot with ambition is any kind of trauma. And tons of studies have shown that typically, people highly successful do it a lot of times out of some sort of traumatic experiences.
mhm,
Oftentimes that can also be out of having to feeling like we have to prove ourselves.
yeah.
And I was never really told that I was loved, so I didn't really hear I love you, or I don't remember it, at least when I grew up. And
Mhm,
so instead, what I grew up with was, hey, you have to earn your love. You have to work hard for your love. And that's then what I continued. And that's what drove a lot of these actions, because I was like, okay, I need to prove my worth to the world. And
mhm,
so let me do this, let me do another thing, and so on. The good thing though for me is I've enjoyed the process along the way. So I haven't just typically done it just to get the outcome, but to enjoy the journey. And I think that's a big difference, because a lot of people just do something for the sake of the outcome, but they hate the journey, which is
mhm.
very dysfunctional.
Yes.
And so I always recommend people, like, you got to be in it for the journey, because if you just do it for whatever goal or outcome, you're not going to be happy for longer than probably 10 minutes.
Yeah. And that's what I heard actually, that, and I forgot who said that, but they said if you enjoy and really love what you're doing, you're not going to get to burnout. You're only going to get to burnout if you're not doing it from the center or intrinsically, but more like because you think you need to, or you need to you think you need to prove something, or like you said, you need to prove your worth. Or whatever. So, and you mention a lot about studies, and you also say that you have a science-based approach to help reducing hustle when you work with people. So, and you mentioned already a little bit science. So, is that also what science tells us, that when we're having a passion, real passion, not just what we think people need or want us to do, that we are not running into burnout, and we're basically can work as much as we want? Or how does that work?
So it's definitely easier for us when we do something that we're passionate about. However, the one aspect that I've noticed, and I haven't looked much into the science beyond that, but I enjoy doing something as long as I notice that there's value in it for other people, that
Mhm,
I'm providing value. Because I'm passionate about cooking, but I would not enjoy cooking 6, 8 hours a day, right?
mhm,
So I think it helps doing what you like or love, but it's not the only factor influencing burnout. One of the key things, and that's a situation that I had about, was it like 6 months ago or something, with a person that I highly value as a coach. And she was saying, it looks like to me like your brain is like on fire. Like, are you currently working a lot? And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm actually doing pretty well. And he's like, no, but it's like something is like, so, like, it's almost like do you feel like overwhelmed? And I was like, not really. And she's like, do you think a lot? And I was like, yes, yes. So we sometimes might not physically work a lot,
mhm,
but our mind might still be on fire because of like worry, or maybe stored up anger, anxiety, or if people score high on like neuroticism and so on, right?
mhm, mhm,
So it's not always super visible connections for burnout, but it's always, I would say, clearly detectable where it came from.
mhm, mhm. Although I totally know that with the brain being on fire, my brain is always on fire. I always explain it with astrology too. My Mercury is in an air sign, and in Aquarius. So always in the future, always thinking, like always 7 million things juggling in my brain. That's just how it is. Now it's a little harder, because I realize the older I get, the harder actually it is to keep all these balls in the air. But yeah, so I think some people just naturally also think more than others. So, but yeah, you're right. We can burn ourselves out just with our brain completely. Yeah. So, what is the remedy. So you figured out something because you're traveling the world. You have, I don't know, 2 businesses, you're teaching, you're whatever else you're doing. It's I can't keep up with it. And still you're kind of seem to have a work-life balance, to use that triggering triggering word that a lot of people just freak out when they hear it. So what is the trick to it? What did you figure out?
I think one of the keys is understanding how I work and how I work best and how I provide the best possible outcome. So, for example, I love mornings. I could not get my best on work in the evening. There's just a certain point at the late afternoon when my brain just shuts down. And I'm also very strict with my time. So, most weeks, the majority of the year, I only have meetings on Mondays and Wednesdays so that the other days are free. I don't just do things when I have to do them. I make sure that whatever I do it when I'm in my best energy for that and when I'm inspired. And what I mean by that is the one example I tend to bring is you might want to write a blog article, but you don't feel like writing it. And so you sit down and you procrastinate, you end up counting the dust on the floor, right? And then it takes you 4 hours to write that article. Whereas if you were writing that article during an inspired moment, it would probably take you only 30 minutes to finish it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you understand what do you need, what are the external factors that you need in order to produce good work, then that's already a good step forward. The other aspect is just really like I love my mornings. Like own your mornings. Do not just start work right off like rolling out of the bed. And I often take an hour and a half or 2 before I start any kind of work for like making coffee, working out, meditating, getting myself ready for the day. And so I just really, really consciously take that time. And I think I'm also fairly straightforward with the standards that I have in life and in work, and I communicate that to people. So, for example, I value walking one's talk, and I do not engage with people that continuously show me that they don't walk their talk. I value being on time. So, I try to be on time as much as I can prioritize it, and I want to always do that. Um, and just also like monotasking. So one thing that I've noticed like really tends to mess with my brain is if I look at my phone next to doing something. So oftentimes I would just put my phone behind my laptop while I'm working,
Mm-hmm.
or right now it's actually even away from me because it's charging somewhere, but I cannot even grab it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So just really understanding what stresses you out, what effect does it have, and then implement it. And you got to know it for yourself. Nobody else can tell you. And unless you implement it, other people might not respect it. Like you first got to respect yourself before other people respect you and your time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like when I talk with people who are moms. And the one thing that they always end up coming back with saying is that, hey, when I focus more on myself, the relationship with my kids improve, the relationship with my husband improves, I start having more time, everything is more relaxed and more chilled.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like we've especially as women, I would say we just have such a guilt sometimes if we don't put others first.
Mm-hmm.
But just try to overcome that because putting yourself first is really, really valuable and the world needs that
Yeah.
from you.
Yeah. I totally agree with you, because that's kind of what all the things you just said, how to find out or when your most inspired time is to do certain things and all that. That's all I talk about when I tell people how to be organized. I always say to become aware what you're doing, figuring out what would work better for you, be intentional about all these things. And then I get all these nods and they don't do anything. So the big question is, how does Pamela get her clients to do something? Because the difference between having an insight and then actually do something, there is kind of like a gap. And a lot of people also, I get pushback when I say a few minutes a day keeps the chaos away. But I did read that there is science-based, that little bite-size progress creates big change, right? So now get on your soapbox and tell us exactly how we go from insights to then actually doing the things, and that small tweaks and small things actually bring big results.
Yeah, so the one thing that I teach in all of my workshops is something I call the 4R method. And some people might have heard that in other variations, but I've added one element to it. And so the 4R's pretty much stand for recognizing, realizing, resting, and replacing. And what I mean by that is recognizing is first noticing when and where you stressed. And with where, I mean where in your body. So a lot of times if people have lost touch with their body and they think having pain is natural.
Mm.
But our body actually wants to be in a healthy state. What's natural is to be in a healing state, right? So if at any point in time something feels uncomfortable, I have a pull in my back, my chin feels stiff or whatever, then that is a sign that something is not working for me, right? So just recognize what's going on. And then the second step is the most important one that most people miss. Realize it's okay. It is what it is. A lot of people, the point where they notice something, they start judging themselves. And they maybe
Finding it.
start making bad annotations about themselves. Like, not again, I'm too stupid, I'm never going to get this, right? Stop that. Like, hard stop. And just tell yourself it is okay. It is what it is. Because a lot of times, a lot of suffering comes from us not accepting the reality of what is and wanting to push against that. But what we need to understand, and that's a little bit of a physics principle as well, whatever we push harder against gets magnified, right? So we first want to recognize what's going on, then we want to realize it's okay, it is what it is. And then when we're stressed, we want to, as a next step, slow down our breathing to relax. And there's different ways to do that. One of my favorite ways is just to do a 4 seconds in, hold 1 second, and 7 seconds out breath, and then repeat that for like 1 or 2 minutes. So that's about 5 to 10 repetitions, I think. And because what that does, it tells our, I hope I'm going to say that right now, parasympathetic nervous system that everything is okay, that the stress is gone, that we're relaxed, that we're safe. Like a lot of times when we respond in stress, we feel like we're not safe about something, right? So we first want to signal our brain and our body that we're safe before making the next step, which is pretty much replacing it. So replacing whatever response we're facing with a positive affirmation or action, right? So if, let's say I told myself, oh my God, I'm so stupid, this always happens to me, I would literally go, I'm so smart, it is so easy for me to change this trigger. And I would just keep repeating that. Those things don't just work from just doing it once. It doesn't work. You're probably caught up in a behavioral pattern that has been going on for years or even decades, right? And so in order to break that, we have to continuously reaffirm the positive opposite, right? We cannot just do away with something. We cannot just forget about it. You have to replace it, right? And typically the ideal ratio is 7-1 because negative thoughts hit our brain 7 times harder than positive thoughts. So you want to at least repeat something 7 times in a positive way. And then that's like a good first step to start bringing about that change. But along that process, always be patient with yourself.
Yeah. This reminds me of what I read on your website too. You have an African proverb there. If there is no enemy within, the enemy outside can do us no harm, right? And oftentimes we're really our worst enemy. And hello, I can do that too. I call it the mental clutter that we literally have to get rid of. And it's so true. A lot of people say, oh, I want to not think that anymore, but you can't just not think it. You kind of have to replace it with something more positive, right? And I find it interesting that you say 7 times. So I just knew that like the negative thinking is almost like a Grand Canyon through your brain. So you definitely need to have more repetition than just tell yourself once and then think, I don't believe it. So I guess I do it wrong. But especially as women, as you mentioned earlier too, is like, I think we're so geared towards doing everything for everybody else, but also questioning ourselves constantly. Have you experienced that too in your career, also working with leaders, that women are more questioning themselves than men?
Yeah, absolutely. Because men from early on are just taught to go for something. They have a much lower threshold also for pain if we're experiencing anything negative. And oftentimes they are less bothered by something negative because we women are more in touch with our emotions, right? So it hits differently. And that's okay. There's power in everything, there's positives in everything. So I'm just a big person for leveraging whatever positive every person got going on for themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, we're all different, right? And if everybody would be the same, it would be a very boring world. So, but somehow certain traits and certain things are so elevated and loudly screamed, especially in the social media world, that sometimes other strengths and other positive traits get just buried or drowned out, right? So, and especially these soft skills have been for a long time not really valued. So I think that's also sometimes where this busyness comes from, especially in women, that our inherent traits that were maybe by nature, I don't want to say better at, but maybe is more in the foreground, like the nurturing part, because as mammals, we're kind of nurturing our babies, right? Whether we're now human or whether we're another animal, and those were just like dismissed. So I think that's sometimes where busyness comes from. So I was reading also on your website that because the world is so obsessed with the busyness, that we sometimes forget the essence of being human. What do you mean with that, the essence of being human?
That we have everything we need within ourselves. There is no other technological device or chip that we need in order to fix us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are people right now out there that I'm just gonna call him by name, Ray Kurzweil, who works at Google, who's a fabulous brain, but he describes the body, the human body, as a fragile object.
Mm.
Like he says, human beings are fragile, and that's so far from true.
Mm-hmm.
Like our bodies and our humanness is the most advanced aspect we have out there. The things that our body can repair, the mechanisms it has, are insane,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we are often told these days that, hey, you as a human being, you are so fragile. You need that external thing to tell you how you're doing. You
Mm-hmm.
need to implant that chip in order to be competitive in the world, and so on. And that's really not true anymore, because what happens in these moments is that we literally start losing the ability to know ourselves and to
Mm-hmm.
self regulate. And this is so, so important because, again, we got everything we need. We don't need to spend any more money on any other devices. And I just wish people would understand that more,
Mm-hmm.
because it will make the world a lot better place. People would save a whole lot of money on expensive treatments that they never need and live a much healthier and happier life.
Yeah, I'm so glad I asked you that. I came across that on your website because that's exactly it. And to say that that we need outside um, input or chips, like you mentioned, or whatever, is just crazy. When we think about what our body does on a daily basis without our doing, like all this creating blood and pumping blood and healing ourselves, because like when we have a little cut, it heals on its own. We don't do anything, right? All this thinking, all this surviving over all these generations, this progress we made without, because technology and all that, what Google is offering, for example, and we don't want to bash Google, it's just one example, is only coming out in the last few years, right? And the humans are here for so much longer. And if we would be so fragile and vulnerable, we wouldn't have made it here at all. So I love that you said that.
Yeah, and disclaimer for everybody who's listening, I used to work at Google. So like I've seen the company from the inside as well, and it's a good company.
Mm-hmm.
So but like for example, the US right now is working on a bill that I hope it does not get approved, but by 2030 every newborn baby should have a chip implanted.
Yeah,
And we're
that's
literally
scary.
telling people from when they're born, you are not enough as you are.
Mm-hmm.
And I have such a big issue with that because the premise of that is we're literally leading people more and more into war. People don't start wars when they're happy. People don't start wars when they feel enough. People only start wars when they feel like they are not enough.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my God, that's not where I thought we're ending up with this conversation. But yeah, no, it's totally scary, and it's not against, like, we can make progress in technology and everything, but we have to remember that we are the biggest wonder, right? Like the life itself, whether it's the human life or any other life, is a miracle because we still don't know really where it came from. I mean, we know certain things, but we don't know why out of nothing life happens, right? So to say that we're not enough and we need technology in our brain is not just scary, it's like, I don't even know the word, Pamela. I don't
Yeah,
even.
and to kind of like cross the bridge a bit more to light up the mood again,
Yeah.
like to people who work in corporates, right? And who, because oftentimes that's where you feel like you're not enough. You always have to
Yeah.
perform more, you always have to do more, right? And then people just get one more smartwatch and they get another headband that helps them sleep better and whatever else, right? And just
Mhm.
to see that nothing fixes them anyway. It's you really got to understand what makes you happy and content, and for that you have to know yourself and you have to spend time with yourself alone without any device.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that might be, if you really want to go like pull the trigger, do a silence retreat for a week,
Mhm.
right? Or go a couple of days without a phone. Like, if you are in a severe situation, this is what I recommend people to do,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
And even if you're like a busy mom, right, or a busy dad, take 15 minutes in the morning, during lunch, in the evening, just by yourself. And if that's you yourself locking yourself into the bathroom with your headset on or whatever, you will find a space. You will find time to do it. And this is so important because you'll see, once you enter that silence, your brain automatically is going to start making connections that are healthy for you, that offer you solutions, that lead you towards more well being and happiness, right?
Mhm.
But you
Mhm.
got to give yourself that space.
Mhm. Yeah. Totally. So you just answered my next question because you usually asked what what is one thing people can start doing right now, but you just answered it. So that's really perfect. So talk a little bit about, like, you work with leaders, you work with clients. I don't know whether you work with only leaders or whether you work with anybody. Just talk a little bit what you do in your work and why people come to you, maybe other than when they're shortly before burnout.
Yeah, so typically we work with managers, executives, people that have other people that rely on them, people that need to display a high level of excellence and might not be able to show their emotions much, people that often might have to um, suppress their emotions. So
Mm.
they're not able to speak up about them in order to fit in with company and corporate politics, right? To
Mhm.
help them climb the ladder. And typically, that also is accompanied by health issues that manifest themselves just because of the stress being accumulated.
Mhm.
And so we help them understand, like, where does the stress really come from? Like, when a lot of people think the stress comes from the children, what we've noticed is it's not that their children are stressing them out or the colleagues. It is something that those people do that triggers something that had happened in their childhood that was negative for them, and that then they now project onto the situation that's happening. And the bad thing that's happening here is we then project a story onto what's happening, which doesn't reflect reality, right? So I could be sitting in a meeting, and there's a certain colleague that every time, like, we're speaking, he would tap on the table, like with the fingers, right? And one could get stressed about that and not know why suddenly one is sweating, when that could have been what, for example, the dad did right before he was about to hit you as a child, right? But most people have forgotten about that. So we help them understand the triggers, the subconscious issues that are there, the trauma that has been there and might need to be released, so that they can then start getting back to themselves, taking better care of themselves, and then perform better in their career, or have the courage to make the change and do something different.
Yeah. And so if somebody is listening now and would be interested to work with you, where could they find you? Where would you send them? Do you have a favorite social media platform where they could check you out first? Or what would you suggest?
So a good starting point is our website, hustlelesslivemore.com, where we are continuously working on publishing new resources, articles, and so on. And then we're obviously using social medias like TikTok. You can find it with Hustle Less, Live More. We're on Instagram with that as well, where we just try to really publish resources that help people understand where the stress comes from, and quick tricks and tips and hacks that they can implement in their daily life in order to bring about that change.
Yeah. So I will put the link to your website in the show notes, and then they're probably going to find you on the other platforms through that website, right? So before we wrap up, last question. Did I not ask something that you feel like has to be said within this conversation, or you just have any other last words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
The only thing that I would add is I really hope to the listener that he or she or you become more aware of the stories that you tell yourself, and your own power of changing that story. Whenever you're telling yourself a negative story, you can also tell yourself a positive story. And what makes you happier? It's very easy to see, right? So just tell yourself the story that makes you happier, and then watch the change in your life. It is inevitable. So I really do hope that you create and find the best possible story for yourself.
Yeah. Which feels so much better, right, than being stressed out by the negative story. Yeah. Thanks so much, Pamela, for coming on and sharing your wisdom, your findings. And it was a really exciting conversation. It even ended up in a place where I didn't think we would end up. But was an important, I don't want to call it detour. It was important to get there. So thanks so much.
Yeah, it's as I always say, I never know where these conversations go, but they always go where they're supposed to go.
Exactly. That's exactly how I'm doing these conversations. Thanks so much.
Thank you too.
Hey, I'm Conny, your host, and I wanted to thank you for listening to the podcast today. Did you know you can bring your chaos to me? If you struggle with chaos in your office, on your desk, in your files and finances, use the link in the show notes and sign up for a complimentary 30 minutes Chaos to Peace Jumpstart call